Hi, my name is Maxim, and I have a problem with God. In one hand, as a Christian, I believe that God created man in his own image and likeness. But as a psychologist, on the other hand, I also believe that man created God in his own image and likeness. So how do I deal with that paradox? One of the reasons fundamentalists hate human science, it is because it has deeply shaken the very vision we make about religion and about God in general. In one side, you have all the discovery of anthropology that shows us that beside the classical monotheistic idea that there is just one God, other nations would decide that there are several gods, and we call that polytheism. And before that, mankind, and that was probably the initial religion for every human, were dealing with a gazillion of small nature spirits. We call that religion animism. You can add to that picture that some people would consider that the entire nature in itself is God. It is called pantheism. And some people would say, well, God exists, but he created the laws of nature, and then he left the nature works by itself. And it is called deism. So sociologically, there is many different ideas about God. Now suppose we stick to the monotheistic approach of God, which means that there is just one God who is ruling the entire show. If you ask to several believers, and even in the same church, what do they think about God's psychology, because God is a person, then you will have all sorts of answers. Some will say he's punitive, some will say he's forgiving. Some will say he's just focused in one ethnicity, and some people will say he's universal. So if you want to put together all those different ideas of God, and within the same idea, all the different personal version people make themselves of God, it is very reasonable to raise some doubts. Is there anything common with all those approaches? And the answer of the human science is no. There is not a unified vision of God. In the Western civilization, the basis of the religious vision of God is, of course, the Bible. And if we just take the first book of the Bible, which is the Genesis, it is said that God has created man in his own image and likeness. That means three fundamental things. First of all, well, God exists as a person. Second of all, God has created everything, which means the entire world, but including ourselves. So we owe everything to God. If we are alive, it is God. If we have a mind, it is God. And we have, it's not say like that, but we have a complete debt towards him. And the third aspect, and the very idea of religion, is that God is expecting us to do certain things. God has a plan for us. And our capacity to be happy in life depends upon our capacity to adhere to the plan of God. The problem of God is not only a matter of believing if yes or not God exists. I already mentioned that some people believe that he exists, but it doesn't really matter. But above all, you can completely deny the existence of God, and no one will be able to prove or disprove completely the existence of God. But you may feel intrinsically convinced that God is just a social construct people has created out of the imagination. Still, you have to acknowledge that that very social construct has a huge impact on the human behavior. So from the standpoint of psychology, God exists in people's mind. It deeply impacts health, the life, and even the architecture. For instance, people who believe in God have created cathedrals. Remove God, you remove the cathedrals. There is, in that sense, a very psychological existence, but it is already an existence. But I must say that the debate whether God exists or not remains just a matter of belief till you start having within your soul spiritual experience kicking in. And as the spiritual experience is like a direct experience and a direct connection with what we may call the Godhead, from the moment they occur into your mind or your soul, or call it however you want, it will force you to reassess the very idea of God. And if you are already a believer into a religion, of course you will use the symbols and the figures that your culture has transmitted you to explain that spiritual experience. And if you feel like a huge feeling of love within your heart, and you explain that to a priest, he will tell you, oh yes, that's the presence of the Christ. But that very feeling can also happen to a non-Christian or even an atheist. And the very difference with having another religion or no religion is that in the specific Christian framework, that innermost feeling is called the Christ. But sometimes the spiritual experience, or maybe the lack of any spiritual experience, would create a breach between you and your religion, and you will feel at odds with it, and you won't be able to click anymore with it. That is how you feel that there is something deeply wrong about the narrative that your religion is offering towards God. And in this situation, there are two possible ways to deal with that. The most brutal way would be to just leave that religion and to find another one. And the other is to acknowledge that struggle and try to deepen it, because here's the fact about your idea of God. Sometimes it has to grow. The idea of God you have is too small, and as your consciousness is growing, the very idea you make yourself of God also has to grow. And this requires to go through what Saint John of the Cross was calling the dark night of the soul, those horrible moments of doubts. And it is part of the spiritual experience. Feeling that you are completely disconnected with God, with the idea of God, with your community, is really part of the religious experience. Know what's happened when you have a spiritual experience and you do not belong to any formal type of religion. Well, as a spiritual experience by essence will shake you at the very bottom of your soul. You will start being in a quest, and you will maybe consider starting a spiritual journey with meditation or prayer, any type of spiritual practice. And usually people tend to cherry pick different techniques and sometimes concepts from different religions to make their own mixture of a religion. And it's a bit when like preparing a dish with the starter from Thai cuisine, then the main dish with French traditional cuisine, and the dessert from, who knows, the South American cuisine. And usually it creates a very strange mix, and those who adhere to just one cult would call that syncretism, which is a little bit of everything. And of course, even a formal religion has integrated many other types of practice. And if we, for instance, if we take Christianity, the very belief about the soul and what's going on for the soul, it's much more Platonic than biblical. So somehow it's pagan, and now it's entirely part of Christianity. So even formal religion are syncretic. But the main risk with self-created type of spirituality is that you are at risk of following any strange ideas, and most of all, falling the victim of people and community who may exploit your spiritual needs. And this is one of the good things of established religion. There is no doubt they have committed a lot of bad things, but they also have a very long experience in everything wrong you can do about spirituality, and they have developed some mechanism to deal with those ill effect of the spirituality. And young religion, or what we may consider as a cult, usually are extremely vulnerable to all sorts of dysfunctional attitudes and very toxic behavior. And if you tinker out your spirituality without the deep root of a religion, you are more at risk to follow whatever idea you find fit and to fall into the influence of a cult. But the entry into a religion is a very serious matter, and it is not something you can do lightly. You can enter at any time in a church and discuss with a priest. But what we call conversion is just the very beginning of a long process where sometimes you will feel completely at odds with the entire community. Spirituality is a journey. It's not that, okay, you have opted to the right club and suddenly you will become the right type of person with the right spirituality. If you enter deep into a religion, you will see that there are many, many layers in it, and some of them horrible, some of them wonderful, but you have to be able to watch them all, because it is part of the spiritual experience. So if we go back to the initial question, is man God-made or is God man-made? The answer of the spiritual psychology is both. There is no way we can connect to the Godhead if we don't create in our own mind an image of God. And that mental image will always be wrong because it's just an image. It's the image of the image, because as we have been created in the image of God, if we make an image ourselves of God, it is the image of an image. And what we may consider as the spiritual quest is a very tedious work on trying to make that idea we have about God, to make it grow, to make it deeper, higher, till it becomes something that helps us to become a better person and to deal also with all the negativities of life and all the negativity we have in the soul, all the negativity we see even in the spiritual community. That's why we need strong roots, a community, and a very strong sense of humor, because otherwise the spirituality gets toxic. So this is it for that facet of spiritual psychology. I'll see you in the next episode.